I'm sitting here and I'm having a chat with Michael Drapac, which is a name many cycling people in Australia would know. I don't know if a lot of people know what you look like, but certainly you've contributed a lot to cycling in Australia. How would you paraphrase your involvement with cycling? Can you give it a quick overview?
I've been a fan of cycling since I was a young kid, and back in the 70s I went to a lot of cycling events, particularly the velodrome, and that enthusiasm spilled over to my kids, and by the mid-90s a couple of them wanted to start racing, and so I took my daughter to the Brunswick velodrome about 96 I think it was, and that began my that began my serious involvement with the sport, and it's continued to this day. At the moment, I'm part owner of World Tour team, and but that's been a very slow. That's been an evolution, or a story which started probably 12 years ago in 2004 when we obtained our first UCI license as a continental team, and it's been steady progress from that point up until today.
And you have a genuine love of a couple of different sports. One seems to be horse racing and one is cycling. Is there any other sports that you have an affection for?
I suppose my greatest love has always been horses. I suppose you describe me as a hobby breeder, but I enjoy riding horses and I enjoy handling horses and being involved with them. But other sports, I'm interested in most other sports, but I'm passionate about cycling and horses.
Okay. We just had a lunch and you talked to me a little bit about the duty of care to horses after their racing career.
Yeah.
This is a little bit of a passion of yours, isn't it?
Yeah, about 16 years ago I tried to lobby the VRC and the governing body in Victoria and a few other support. I tried to garner support from a few other people in the industry about establishing a voluntary program for assisting horses to transition at the end of their racing career. And I actually think it's quite ironic almost that we in the sporting world are actually behind the equine and canine world. All my racehorses I've ever had, I have actively looked at having them rehabilitated once they finish their racing career, and that goes back for 20 years. So this idea or this philosophy which I espouse in cycling is not something which I thought about last week. I just think that sustainable approach to whether it be an athlete or being a horse or any aspect of life is that you need to be fully accountable and responsible for what you do and the full cost of what you do. And I always used to think that if you love a bike rider, well, you've got to love a bike rider when he's no longer winning medals, and if you respect him and you admire him, well, that should extend the trajectory. That should extend beyond him being a successful bike rider. Similar, the parallel is that if you love a horse, you don't love a horse just because it's winning races. That's the bonus. You should have a commitment to the well-being of the horse, before it's a racehorse, after it's a racehorse. And I think it's not me I'm not an altruist. I just think it's a very basic, and I'm not lecturing to anyone, I'm not pontificating about how other people should do it. It just sits well with me. I worry about cyclists, what happens to them after their career.
And part of your team philosophy was to educate riders and make sure that they had a pathway to the future after they stopped racing. Does that continue with the Cannondale Drapac team?
Well, in spirit, in kind, yes. But there's a fundamental difference, and that is that these riders are now they're very highly paid individuals. They are, firstly, they're professional athletes, and secondly, they're professional athletes. But what you can do, you can instill into them some fundamental principles and about what are you going to do, when your career comes to an end, and at least get them to understand that when the door of their sport does close, what are they going to do? How are they going to continue to maintain a meaningful life? And if we can at least change the narrative, so that cycling teams at the World Tour level can actually countenance the discussion of, well, what are you going to do when your career's over? But the most important thing is to actually give some energy and thought to what am I going to do, what's going to happen to me beyond my cycling career. Transition does not begin when your sport finishes. I mean, in the ideal world, that training should begin in a holistic program in the formative years of a professional prior to joining a World Tour team. They should have those principles and skills instilled in them. And then once they become a World Tour rider, they can maintain that not just the belief, but maintain those skills. So what do we do at the World Tour level is that really we have a wellbeing program, which is run by an outstanding individual by the name of Rob Arnold, who's based here in Sydney.
And this was part of your initiative when you started the team. The contract with Doug Ellis, that they were to have a wellbeing consultant.
Correct. One of the conditions precedent in merging with Doug Ellis was that we would. There are a number of points, but the key point pertinent to this question is that I would be responsible for appointing and supervising a wellbeing person. And Gero Towie, he runs a business called Crossing. It's a not-for-profit organisation based in Sydney, Crossing the Line Sport. And so he's really instilling in those athletes, even though they're professional athletes, getting them to think about their transition, getting them to start doing things now and facing that reality now, starting to prepare a little bit. The most important thing I think, is to change the narrative. We talk about the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is, you'll get the door of your sport's going to close one day, but it's also an elephant in the room is that you're not allowed to talk about it in a World Tour team. And so if you're so inclined, if you have a propensity to think about this, and there's no one to engage with you. Now, if we change the narrative, and it's something that can be talked about.
I'm intrigued about the whole principle of the Drapac corporate sphere. We had a dinner in January, and I asked you at the end, you're sponsoring essentially as a philanthropist. Pro cycling is propped up by a lot of benefactors, let's call them. So Jerry Ryan, the Astana conglomerate, the Katusha conglomerate, Drapac, Slipstream, which is now a merger. There's also Andy Rees with BMC, for example, but at least he's got a tangible product to sell. How does one buy a Drapac? What do you get out of the branding exercise? Can you explain that to me?
I think we have a long track record going back to the 90s for sustainability. We were the first property group in the world to be signatories and endorsed for our work by the United Nations. And we've done things like at one stage we'd built the greenest office building in Australia, and we introduced the highest grade energy housing. And
so you're a property developer?
I'm my background is science and postgraduate science, but I make a living from investing in property, and that developed into me developing property. But I think my primary focus is investment. And I would say that all it really, what it did do was, I suppose it reinforced my belief in a sustainable approach to sport. And so it was reinforcing I suppose my credo of developing and investing. I've never pulled down a building. I led the way in sustainable development in Victoria and possibly Australia. The axiom is very simple, and that is that sustainability is not about washing the world with green. It's about being responsible and accountable for everything you do. To answer your question, really, you don't buy a Drapac We have a fairly substantial business in the USA, and we're not known in the USA, and the magnitude of our business is significant, but we would see probably at some stage in the future, in the foreseeable future, that we would list our business. And so it does make sense for the Drapac brand to be known in the corporate world of America. So perhaps this would be the first opportunity where I've had where I think I'd demonstrably be able to measure a commercial return for my investment in the sport. Sure, we want to win bike races. You need to win the bike races to maintain your UCI license. You need to win the bike races to keep keep your relationship, satisfy your sponsors, but at the same time not at the expense of compromising on fundamental principles.
So it's not like you came in at the start of the year, did a deal with Jonathan Borders and said, right, I want to buy a seat in the team car for the Tour de France and the Vuelta a España. Because
no.
It's not like a fanboy syndrome, is it? It's
no. And I think, philosophically there was an alignment there, notwithstanding all, the balancing of there's all these metrics you must satisfy, but notwithstanding that, I think there was a meeting of the minds, and philosophically there was an alignment. Doug Ellis, is a really interesting man, and so philosophically he and I. There was a very serious resonance there between the two of us.
Cycling attracts all kinds of different people, and we're speaking a couple of days after I wrote an open letter to Cycling Australia, which was fairly scathing. Well, not trying to be scathing, it was just trying to be open and honest and trying to begin a course of dialogue with the governing body in the country. And it's yielded a reasonable reaction, and that is people are talking about it now. You've had an interesting relationship with Cycling Australia insofar that you've been donating to the cause of cycling for years, and you're probably, I would say, the second biggest benefactor of the Federation, and yet my understanding is Nick Green will just walk past you when you see him at a bike race. Can you give us a little bit of background on your history? And
I should mention Jerry Ryan. I think Jerry Ryan has done, I'm happy to take second seat to Jerry Ryan, because I think Jerry Ryan has done has made an extraordinary contribution to cycling in this country. And philosophically we may be a little bit, there may be a bit of a difference between his view of the world and my view of the world, but no one can ever deny that Jerry's made an outstanding contribution to cycling in this country, and I admire him and respect him for that. But I don't think Jeremiah, I suppose, I wouldn't even call it estrangement. Estrangement implies that there was a relationship. I've never had a relationship with Cycling Australia. I approached them many years ago, and I don't know, they must think I've got some deadly disease or something, because I've never been spoken to by Cycling Australia in all that time. They've never acknowledged what I've done. They've never, we've produced, I think, 35 university graduates. So they wouldn't have a clue what I've done. They don't. Next year we'll have a UCI team, a development team, which is all our riders are full-time students. They wouldn't. I don't think they'd be aware of that either. But to come back to your question, I walked past Nick Green. I said hello to him. He just looked at me like I was a stranger in the crowd. I've never received a call from a CEO of Cycling Australia. I've never received a letter from Cycling Australia to turn around and ask, is there any way we could support you? I read your letter. I don't think it was scathing. I think it's, I just question that if Cycling Australia, there's a number of key stakeholders, they're not in communication with their key stakeholders. I'd say undoubtedly I'm the second biggest benefactor in cycling in this country. No one in Cycling Australia has ever reached out to me. Nick Green certainly doesn't know who I am. May know me by name, but doesn't know me by face. And we get on and do our thing. And I think that my response to your letter is that I think Cycling Australia need to start to think about about their stakeholders and what's important to the stakeholders. what's important to the grassroots of the sport, what's important to the people, you know, the weekend warriors, what's important to the team supporters like myself, what do we think is important? And you know, I've never been asked. I've put millions, well, somewhere close to $20 million, more $30 million in the sport. No one's ever been asked. No one's ever asked me, what do I think is important, or how can we help you? You know, and one of the problems with the sport in this cycling in this country, there's only one metric of success, and that is, you know, how many medals, how many races did you win? In one sentence, what I have done, what Drapac has tried to do in the sport, obviously is of no importance. I've never been invited to a Cycling Australia dinner. I've never been acknowledged. So, you know, obviously what I'm doing is not important to Cycling Australia.
So they've created their own conundrum effectively by as I keep saying, kowtowing to the Australian Sports Commission's model. If you could just come back and just say, right, Cycling Australia, we'll continue the Drapac investment into cycling, that exists. But we want you to invest that in grassroots rather than pursuit of Olympic gold or something like that.
Yeah.
I guess I'm saying to you, if Drapac said to Cycling Australia, here's a huge sum of money, but let's invest in grassroots rather than Olympic gold, do you think they would follow that initiative?
No, I don't think they would, because even I think in some ways my criticism of Cycling Australia is not nearly as strident and as harsh as it used to be, because in some ways, you know, the egg is scrambled for them by the Australian government, because their funding is determined by a very, you know, a really crude, unsophisticated formula. You know, medals equal money, money equals medals, and no one in the world operates like that. I mean, success is more than just the richest guy doesn't win. You know, there needs to be an expanded metrics for success, and I think that if the Australian government, in their funding program or their funding formula, included a number of other metrics. In other words, what's the riders that have gone through the AS program, where are they in 3 years' time? Where are they psychologically? Where are they socially? How have they reintegrated in society? And what are the measures of a successful reintegration? That to me is just a no-brainer. So I was honoured and privileged to go to a dinner last night, which was the 100th anniversary of the Brunswick Cycling Club. And I think Cycling Australia would get a lot of what I'd say a lot of purchase. There'd be a lot of benefit from them just to study that club, and they're not the only club that operates, has a very healthy culture of community. And I think that Brunswick Cycling Club, as many other clubs, have produced outstanding young talent. What we need to cultivate that grassroots. We need to cultivate the community, the real community of cycling. You know, the average person in the street, you know, the average weekend warrior, or the daily commuter, or the guy who rides B grade or C grade, they don't identify with the elite program. And so I would say to Cycling Australia, you know, look at your grassroots, look at your local clubs. Most importantly, communicate, speak to your key stakeholders. I mean, no one's ever spoken to me, no one's ever spoken to anyone hardly I know of. Speak to what they think is success, what they would consider as success. What is success? In the world of 2017, in a new world where we talk about sustainability, we talk about social responsibility, what should success look like? And I would really ask the Australian government to do some homework and say, you know, do you really think that the average person in the street, the average Australian John citizen, really supports a program like this? That this is the only metric of success? So I think it's got to come from the Australian government. It's got to come from the Minister for Sport. Just going to the Brunswick cycling dinner last night, it reminded me how much I really love grassroots cycling, and
As in the good old-fashioned track carnival.
The good old-fashioned track carnival, and it was interesting just to see the camaraderie, the community, the real community. We need to create a rich, strong, vibrant community of cycling, and it is not about promoting self-glorification of the ego. It's about promoting a healthy grassroots culture, and from that grassroots, the cream will come to the top, and you'll have a very healthy cycling future. Australia will have. I mean, there's no company, whether you pick any company you like, no one operates their business in a cut and dry sense like the Australian government does. Here's medals, there's money. It doesn't work like that. Everyone has a social responsibility agenda. Everyone has a sustainable agenda. Everyone has a well-being program. Does it really matter whether we got one silver and a bronze? It doesn't really matter, right? It doesn't really matter, right? There's a better, what we need is a really healthy culture of cycling, which is grassroots, and we need to care.
We spoke at lunch and you said you were apolitical. Is there a temptation perhaps to become a little bit more politically outspoken or politically connected? And let's face it, people with money have that capability. Are you interested in lobbying government or trying to lobby CA again, you've done over and over again, or you've taken your bat and ball and taken it to America, you're going to spend your money into that team, and
correct,
and that's your response, rather than, and they should understand that is your response. But I don't even know if they've flinched when the announcement was made in July that you were taking on co-naming rights sponsorship of the World Tour team.
It's not me taking my bat and ball to the USA. I think, let Cycling Australia, I'm not a political animal, have no desire to be. I would just ask, both sides of politics to really, I'd like to see a bipartisan approach. We need to redefine what success is in the sport. What is the purpose of sport? What does success look like for an Australian person in sport? Good sporting citizenship is subordinate to good citizenship. A sporting citizen, the objectives of sporting citizenship is subordinate to citizenship. In other words, the purpose of sport is actually to enhance community and enhance good citizenship. We've flipped it around the other way, where it's now good citizenship is held almost hostage. It's, these athletes allow that, it's communities make great, it's all about communities. Communities make great places to live, and they don't happen by chance. You've got to design and plan for them, and sport has a fundamental part to play in that. Sport is about enhancing community. It's about enhancing, I think, civility. And so we need to think about sport in the sense of what really is sport about. It's about, as you said, increasing the health of the nation. The obesity is a serious epidemic. I think diabetes is even worse a problem. And I think that we need to think about, there needs to be a comprehensive, integrated review and come up with a comprehensive, integrated definition, I believe, what is the purpose of government funding sport in this country. It's not about self-glorification of a person's ego. I think that sends terrible messages out to our young people. It's about enhancing community more than anything else, promoting good health, conscientious living, etc., etc. And I think that I think you would see. I'm not blaming Cycling Australia anymore. I'm disappointed that they didn't send me a postcard. But I'm being somewhat flippant there. But I think that they're held hostage. They are held hostage. People in Parliament in Canberra are supposed to be intellectual people. For God's sake, give Cycling Australia and the Australian Sports Commission a go. Give them, you set the rules, you define the formula, and they'll deliver. At the moment, you're the ones who are holding them hostage. I don't love the sport any less because we didn't win a gold medal. In fact, I probably love it more because we didn't, in a bizarre sort of way. And I think every person involved in the sport, is a human being, and they do care about their charges, but the Australian government doesn't allow them to. And I'm throwing it straight at the Australian government, guys. We live in an enlightened world. Do you really know what people who this is one of the greatest sporting nations in the world? We love our sports people. Do you really think that all Australians are a bunch of morons, that the only thing that matters is how many gold medals we get? Wake up, Parliament. When the mandate from the Australian Sports Commission is changed, when that is sanctioned, and that sanction then must extend to the Australian, so it goes from the Australian the Australian government, the Australian Sports Commission, to Cycling Australia. Then Cycling Australia's success is going to be measured in all these other dimensions. Then I'll have a talk to them.
And I think everyone would feel quite liberated by that, but no one seems prepared to make that revolution happen.
It's a very powerful word. I think that it would be a liberation. Just about everyone I've ever spoken to acknowledges and recognises the problem, but they're somewhat powerless. No one's happy with the system. No one's happy with the system. I've seen some of the replies. Yeah, no one's happy with the system. I mean, it's like, who wants this? I don't know. And you need to ask yourself the real question: how do we double the cycling population? And sure, there's the infrastructure, the physical infrastructural changes, but there's also that spiritual change, that paradigm, that it's sort of paradigmatic, but that change where the way we view a bike rider, and in the way we view a bike, the French are very good at this. They view the bike rider with a degree of reverence, certainly respect.
There's legislation for protecting facades of certain buildings in the city, but they can't legislate to create a new building that is actually energy efficient. You must ask yourself that question every day.
Well, that's a topic very dear to my heart, and there's a parallel with the purpose of sport. We create communities. We create sporting communities. At the end of the day, we create communities. At the moment, we're subdividing land, and so we're not creating communities. The idea is what makes a great community, and that's a long discussion. But what creates a great community? And then what you're doing is you're offering people the opportunity to buy part of that community. So what are the fundamental components of a great community? And there's physical infrastructure, and there's social infrastructure, and there's social programs, etc. But this is where what's happening in Sydney and most of the Western world, we're just subdividing land, and and we're doing it for cars. The design of these subdivisions are designed for cars, and they're not designed for people. And they're not designed for communities. And that's another very long discussion.
I quote Dave Byrne every time the Tour de France goes over or underneath the Viaduc du Milo, and I say, and he made a parody film, True Stories. This is the lead singer of Talking Heads. I think everyone knows who. I love that band. And he's driving along in the movie, and he sees a spaghetti junction somewhere in California, and he says, highways, they're the cathedrals of our time. And it's a mockumentary, but it's some of the references, like that one in particular, stay with me, and they've stayed with me for 20 years, because there was once a time when the cathedral was something that brought the community together, and it was created by the rich churches. But now governments spend all of their money on creating roads and more roads, and to get more votes they create more roads, and it just perpetuates on itself, doesn't it? And this is going way off topic, but
it is going way off topic. But it is fun. It actually goes to the heart of the matter. Pardon the pun. Is that I think the biggest problem with the world today is the poverty of the human heart, and poverty of the human heart is what are communities? Communities actually nurture the human heart. A community by definition is that the common good is greater than the individual. And that is what life is about. Community. Community is where you advance the common good beyond the individual. That's why in classical Greek-Roman planning, the best land belonged to the people, the best buildings belong to the people. And the problem we have here, and the cathedral was the best example, and it was built with heart and soul. So what we've done, one of the problems of the last 30, 40 years, is we've pushed away from our heart up into our head. And if you wanted to distill it to one sentence, is that the common good is not an issue anymore in sport. It's all about the individual good, self-glorification of an individual. So let's go back to community principles. Basic community is the common good is the greater good. And that nurtures the human heart. And so, without getting too sort of esoteric about this, but that's what we need to do. We actually need to really promote healthy sporting communities. And the rest will follow. The results will follow. But the most important thing, you're going to have a lot of happy people.
It can go back to the Cycling Australia open letter which I formulated. Where it has to be, it can't be the athlete is the most important, it can't be the organisation
that's
is the most important, it can't be the bike rider or the team sponsor or it has to be everyone together. The community is absolutely fundamental. And I guess we called them stakeholders, but every one of those elements is a stakeholder, and every one of those can come together and create a greater community. And let's hope that.
That's actually it. It's as simple as that. Yeah. The individual good. It's about the greater resources should be directed towards the community, and always has been, and always should be. And that's their ancient ideas. It's actually not Cycling Australia. No. It's really the Australian government is start to think about that sporting programs should be based on universal principles of community. Basically that, where no individuals, you can't focus on an individual. It's about the greater community. The common good is the greater good, and that let's create a great sporting community.